Hello, Gilbert. Challenge. Can you hear me?
Yes, Doc, I can hear you, Doc. You're live, Doc. You're our live, Doc. Go
I,
ahead.
I realize it, but I couldn't hear anything. And anyhow, so, there you go. Always something, isn't it? Today we're going to be talking about the verdict on vitamin D, the VITAL study. It's interesting. I read the study and I read a bunch of critiques of the study and debate about it. And when I saw Jesus's take on it using the verdict, I thought, that's really harsh. That's final. And then I thought, well, you know what? A lot of this is coming out of the New England Journal. So everybody always thinks if it's the New England Journal, it's the final word. It is the verdict. Maybe not so fast, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. If you're new to the channel, here's what we do. We talk about the things that really kill and disable more of us than anything else. So welcome to the channel. The things that kill us and disable us more than anything else are heart attack, stroke, dementia, some things that unfortunately 2/3 of doctors, even in the US, what is reported to be one of the best, clearly one of the best, if not the best healthcare manpower group in the world, 2/3 of them don't know how to diagnose the things that cause these problems. So unfortunately, if you've ever heard the term buyer beware, that really applies to this. That applies to getting health care and getting healthy from the people that are supposed to help you understand that. Buyer beware. So that's what this channel is all about. It's about helping people understand the causes of heart attack, stroke, and they all, about 80% of them, boil down to prediabetes and diabetes, 90% of which is unfortunately undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or completely undiagnosed. So we'll get a little bit deeper into that. It's not that hard. It may sound intimidating, but within just a few hours, you can know more than at least 2/3 of the doctors out there about these things that really drive your health. So let's talk a minute about some of the previous topics with ApoB. There's a big thing out there recently about ApoB. People saying, oh, ApoB is just so much more important than LDL. And it's really the most important thing. No, it's not. It's more important in many ways than LDL, for sure, but it's not the most important thing. So you can chase that bunny down that bunny hole if you want. There's good information about it, and we did cover it last week. So if you're interested in ApoB, you've heard Dave Spring talk about it. You've heard Peter Attia talk about it. Other people talk about it. We gave you our take last week. Stress tests don't prevent heart attacks. They don't predict them even. And, you would think we would know that by now, but humans, well, we just seem to have a problem learning some things sometimes. We go into detail and depth on that. I actually wrote a whole book on it. I'll mention it a little bit later. We've got a standing slide in the intro on that. And then a couple of weeks ago, when I was in Yellowstone National Park, Dr. Vega and David Mines talked about keeping your brain healthy. Now, as I said, you can actually learn more than 90% of doctors out there, at least 75% of doctors out there, regarding the things that really drive health, things like plaque, how to evaluate plaque, and no, it's not a stress test. Insulin resistance, what is that? What's it got to do with prediabetes and diabetes? And why is it so important? Why is it so underdiagnosed? How do you diagnose it? How do you know if you've got that problem, and what do you do about it? Again, another couple of hours. Cardiovascular inflammation. The thing is, what's really killing us is injury to the lining of the artery wall. And we talk about that in this course called Cardiovascular Inflammation. Our arteries are actually, the microscopic arteries are actually lined with a thing called glycocalyx. It's sort of like if you go out to the marshlands, so much of the biological activities that happen near the shore happen in the marshland. Same thing with our bodies. The metabolic transfer of, dropping off oxygen, picking up carbon dioxide, dropping off energy and building blocks, and picking up waste materials. All that happens right there at the glycocalyx. And unfortunately, that's what this is all about. If your blood sugar remains too high for too long, it injures the glycocalyx, which shouldn't be a surprise. Glyco stands for glucose. So glucose is a major building block of the hairy, fuzzy glycocalyx, the lining of those microscopic artery walls. And if you bathe them in too much glucose too long, they soften and get injured, and they can't do their job. So there's a lot more to understand about what's really killing us than, again, most docs know, but you can find that out. It doesn't cost you, if you want any of these for free, you can contact our office. Gilbert, if you'll put the telephone number up, we'll work to make it free for you if you can't pay the $14 or $19 or $29 that it happens to be on for at the place that you find it. Speaking of places you can find that and find us, we have YouTube now has memberships, and we have more and more memberships. Actually, we have an old business partner of mine, Yale Roche, joined us on the membership recently. Those memberships help us get this information out, and it's being consumed all over the world. So not only is it being consumed, it's saving lives. Just go out and read some of the comments on the channel, and you'll pick that up. If you're not a YouTuber, you don't like YouTube for whatever reason, you're getting into the political debates, and you're more of a Locals or Rumble person, we've got presence there as well. Just go to those places and you can find us. We thought we were going to be transitioning the monthly subscription plans out. They've been very popular during the direct pay phase. But as we get deeper into the transition into accepting insurance, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the monthly subscription plans will continue to work out. In fact, they're probably going to grow. But we'll talk about those a little bit later. Just real quick, as I mentioned, stress tests don't predict heart attacks. Tim Russert is, or more accurately was, the poster boy for that. It was either Meet the Press. It was either Meet the Press or Face the Nation, and for some reason, I always confuse those two shows. He was the longest running host on it, well loved. Started getting some problems with his blood pressure, and his belly was expanding, hitting closer to a 40-inch waist. He said, "Hey, doc, can we just do a stress test to make sure I don't have anything going on?" Well, and the doc agreed, and Tim Russert was a runner. So what a stress test will tell you is if you've got some, a relative gauge of what your cardiovascular endurance, exercise endurance is, but it doesn't tell you whether you have inflammation. It doesn't tell you whether you've got very significant risk for a heart attack and stroke. There is some correlation between cardiovascular endurance and heart attack and stroke risk, but it's not that big. And again, when they did the autopsy on Russert, oh, by the way, after passing his stress test with flying colors in April, a month or two later, he flew back from Italy to record the next show. The producer walked in, he said, "What's happening?" And keeled over dead. They did the autopsy on Russert, and they found that despite passing his stress test without any problems, the inside of his arteries looked like the pimply, like the face of a teenager with a bad case of acne. He had all these pimples that were cardiovascular inflammation, burning of that glycocalyx. And when those pimples pop, they can cause clots. And it's not the plaque that kills you, it's the clot. But hot plaque will cause the clot. You can learn all about that in our course on cardiovascular inflammation, and just continuing to check out content on this show. We don't use a lot of statins. We don't use statins nearly as much as most docs, but we do use them. We don't really use statins to decrease LDL. Statins have a different, it's called a pleiotropic mechanism, and that pleo means many. If you've if you know any astronomers, ask them about the Pleiades. That's the 7 sisters. It's a whole lot. It's many. And a pleiotropic mechanism for a medication is a mechanism that you didn't actually predict, didn't understand, and got a little bit of a surprise about. That's what happens with statins. Statins actually decrease that cardiovascular inflammation that we've talked about a couple of times already just in the intro to this show. Now, there's a trade-off with statins. Most statins push you a little bit down that insulin resistance highway, that diabetes highway. So it's like, you got to in order to decrease the cardiovascular inflammation, lifestyle is most important, but we're talking about where drugs matter. And again, we're talking about the class of drugs that's been used more than any. The biggest blockbuster class of drugs, and the need to know a little bit more detail about them. So for most of us, diabetes, prediabetes, insulin resistance causes the problem in the first place. Then most people are getting a drug called a statin. That statin actually continues to push you a little bit further down that diabetes highway to make the problem worse. You're taking it anyway, and the statistics, the evidence has been pretty clear in multiple studies that it does help. Well, so how does it help? Again, it decreases the inflammation. So there's one statin that doesn't push you down that highway, and it's called Livalo or pitavastatin. And it has a positive impact on inflammation, but it doesn't increase insulin resistance. So for obvious reasons, it's very popular, very desirable. Pitavastatin hasn't lost its patent yet. So it's very expensive. Patients, when they try to get on it, will have a problem with their insurance saying, no, we don't know anything about all of that insurance stuff. We don't know anything about all of that. Insulin resistance, diabetes stuff. You got to take Lipitor. That's what's on our formulary. I don't prescribe Lipitor. Lipitor actually Lipitor clearly helps for LDL, but it doesn't help so much for cardiovascular inflammation in 2 situations. Number 1, if you're a female, and number 2, if you've got diabetes or prediabetes. Well, that's just about everybody, maybe 5%, all but about 5% of us. So I don't use Lipitor unless I absolutely have to. The 2 things that I use would be, number 1, a version of Livalo or pitavastatin. And the other is a very low dose Crestor, rosuvastatin. Crestor used to be the go-to statin, and it went generic. So you could get it very, very inexpensively, and you can get it on most insurance plans. Why use something that pushes you down the prediabetes highway? There's a combination of facts that make a big difference. The first is you don't need the high doses of rosuvastatin, 5 milligrams or less, and 5 milligrams or less is not enough to cause diabetes. If you're interested in trying this version of pitavastatin, here's the information. I've talked about it for a few minutes. And again, you can call our office if you have questions about it. So there's a lot of, if you talk to anybody in our office these days, it's all about getting that Medicare and insurance transition set up. So here's the thing. I've always been focused on helping people where they are. And unfortunately, back in the day, and that was very recently, when Medicare was just focused on fee-for-service, it really didn't make sense for us. Now Medicare has changed. They've decreased their routine compensation for fee-for-service. In other words, run in, pat the patient on the back, write a script, and run out so you can pat the next patient on the back and write another script, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Medicare realized they were going bankrupt a couple of decades ago, and they started making some changes. Much more recently, one of the things they've started to do is they've actually started to pay for preventive services. One of the services that they've set up is a thing called CCM, chronic care management. And that's going to be a core part of what we do in terms of our Medicare transition. Medicare has already trialed this, by the way. It piloted it. And guess what? If you participate, if you're a Medicare patient and you participate in the chronic care management program, you're likely to be healthier. The statistics are really, really clear. The evidence is really, really clear. And so why is that the case? It's the case because what you're doing is you're staying in touch with your doctor's office. You're checking in on your health 2 to 3 times a week. You can do it as much as 7 times a week. You can do it less. We're starting to settle in on a cadence of about 3 times per week. The way our system works is we send you a text, and you click on the text. The link takes you to a software program that's set up between you and us, and we ask you a couple of very simple questions. I was our first patient on this program, and I took the diabetes protocol. And that diabetes protocol asks first, well, what's your blood sugar today? When I'm using my Freestyle Libre, I know the answer, so I just put down the blood sugar. I don't have one haven't had one in over a week now, so I just click the answer that says I don't have it today. Then it asks about my blood pressure. And then it asks if I'd like to speak to someone in the office. We're having some glitches on that last item, and I'm sort of pushing on our staff a little bit because they're not quite getting it. The CCIQ software program that we're using is a little bit glitchy in that area, but we're working through that. The bottom line is Medicare has said, look, people that participate in these programs are healthier. They end up not going to the hospital. We will pay for these programs and pay for Medicare participation for these folks, and therefore pay for more of a Medicare type of prevention, which is just really new. And it's a big thing. So we're excited about it. Lots of changes, lots of hard work to get us where we need to be. So again, pardon our dust. And now, one of the things that happens is when we talk to people, they say, for sure, clearly would much rather do this on Medicare than pay for the whole amount. What do I got to do? And we're transitioning through the country. We're up and rolling in Florida now. We're taking patients in Florida. It will probably be a few weeks before we start spreading out to the rest of the country, but give us a little bit of time, be patient, and we'll get to your state. I guarantee it. Thank you for your interest in that space. Dropping acid. There's a book out, and it's just hitting the YouTube airwaves. Another David Perlmutter book. I'm a David Perlmutter fan. And I've got some pros and cons of the book. I'll tell you about those in just a minute, though. But what is dropping acid? He's talking about uric acid. You know, uric acid is very much linked to gout. It's also linked to, an independent risk factor for heart attack and stroke. One of the things that he does is he helps folks understand those connections. He also helps disabuse people of the old worn out concepts that gout was, quote, the rich man's disease. They thought it was the rich man's disease, and it was associated with eating a lot of meat, a lot of seafood, etc. So therefore, in the old days, that was a rich man's habit. The reality is, any primary care doc that's got any experience knows that the classic time for a patient to have a gout attack, at least in the old days, was getting closer to Christmas, because they would get oranges from, a crate of oranges from their friends, or a crate of tangerines. They'd eat 5 or 6 tangerines and they'd go straight into a gout attack. Now, why is it associated with meats and seafood and also tangerines? It has to do with a 5-carbon ring. Once you get down to the metabolism, it's associated with the problem metabolizing purines. Purines are part of the DNA, and therefore you're going to find it in meats and fish, but you're actually going to find a 5-carbon ring in fructose, which is the sugar in fruits. Fructose, the sugar in fruits. So that's why you tend to get these attacks happening when people are starting to eat a lot more fructose. Now, when you start thinking about the association of uric acid, gout, and fructose, and then think about what's happened to the standard American diet in terms of fructose over the past couple of decades, you can start putting some things together. And Perlmutter does that very, very well in terms of talking about the increase in obesity, the increase in the cardiovascular problems occurring these days in our population. Now, a couple of my own comments. What do I think about it? I liked it. As you can tell, I've got a little bit of, I'm a Perlmutter fan. Just like I'm a Peter Attia fan and a Thomas Dayspring fan and a Rhonda Patrick fan and a Dr. Boz fan. But I don't agree 100% with any one of the people that I just mentioned. And I don't agree 100% with David Perlmutter. He's got some interesting stuff. I liked grain brain and a couple of the other concepts that he brought up. But whenever somebody starts talking about prehistory and starts rewriting it, history is written. Prehistory was not written. But, people just put their logic together and say, this is what happened prior to historic times. We have some evidence, but it just makes me nervous. And to me, it's overly arrogant to talk about prehistoric activities as if you were there and you know what happened. And he's got a habit of doing that. The other thing is, the other critical comment I would have is that this is not new. I mean, it's so interesting that so many things like the topic we talked about a few weeks ago, ApoB, and here Perlmutter's discussion about uric acid. These concepts are being treated as if they're all new. They're the latest thing, the hottest thing on the fads on YouTube. And they really are fads because neither one of those things are new. But again, he presents it very well. He writes very well. And if we can get people understanding the basics of what causes heart attack and stroke risk and get them to put that into perspective, that's a really good thing. And to me, the best thing that comes out of this is very similar to the best thing that came out of his Grain Brain. And that is, these are major risk factors. Fructose is a major risk factor driving our population into prediabetes, diabetes, and death. Just like grains were a major risk factor. So because of those two items, he had me at hello. So there you go on that. Now, I wish I could give some good side effects like dun da da da. The verdict, vitamin D, the vital study, it came out. You know what? Gilbert, if you'll give us the water ball, I'll get into the content for today. So here we go. The vitamin D study, New England Journal of Medicine, 2022, United States research group. And if it was the New England Journal, it's got to be real, right? They are pretty good. So this is a preliminary report from an ongoing trial. It's about a third of U.S. adults over 60 years old are taking vitamin D. So at this point, we've got over 100 people attending and listening, and that's one of the reasons. Vitamin D is a big deal. A lot of people believe in it. Excuse me, 115. The VITAL study, it was vitamin D and omega-3 trial. Published in 2012, it states that vitamin supplements do not have important health benefits. Okay, so here's the vital study. In 2011, the Institute of Medicine report established recommended dietary supplementation of 600 to 800 international units of vitamin D for bone health. And here's the 2012 clinical trials discussion of it. They got the VITE from vitamin D and the AL from trial, so VITAL. The authors of the VITAL study compared vitamin D3 and N3 fatty acids versus placebo in over 25,000 US people over 50 years old. They measured vitamin D levels and asked about numerous health outcomes. Their result, vitamin D did not prevent cancer, didn't prevent cardiovascular disease, didn't reduce the risk of atrial fibrillation, stroke, or prevent falls. Now here's another component. They reported that it didn't reduce the risk of fractures. It was follow-up of 5.3 years on not average, but median. And that correlates with the VITAL study suggestion that 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 did not reduce the risk of hip or non-vertebral fractures. That was part of this. But let's go back and talk about the first article for a second. The authors concluded that vitamin D had no effect on fractures. And many people think, well, that should put to rest the notion of an important benefit for vitamin D, because vitamin D is all about bone health. And furthermore, 2,000 international units is enough to show a difference, right? They suggest evidence from other reports that vitamin D3 does not prevent other conditions, and that supplementation with vitamin D should not be recommended. Now, if you listen to Peter Attia and a bunch of other folks out there, especially the YouTubers, that ticked them off. It ticks me off a little bit, but not a whole lot, because that's one of my reasons for being on YouTube. I felt like there was just not enough good review of science on YouTube. So I'm actually enjoying the debate a little bit. One of my major concerns is 2,000 international units enough? But we'll get to some of the other criticisms in just a minute. In fact, just now. So, critical points. Did the researchers achieve a difference in vitamin D levels over the course of the study? The answer is, well, we don't know. Vitamin D was measured in less than 25% of participants at follow-up, and only a fraction of those participants had also provided baseline samples. So, for comparison, about 10% of the total study population, and by the way, it wasn't 5,000 international units that they gave in this trial, it was 2,000. So, what actually did they accomplish? I don't think they know. I think that they think they know. They obviously think they know. And the folks that the New England Journal picked to be judges for inclusion of this article obviously believed it, but I don't. So here's some more critical points. Data from this small subset indicate that the treatment group experienced an increase in vitamin D levels from 29 at baseline to 41. That's significant, while the placebo group did not. Now, how sure can we be that the trend generalizes to the entire cohort? The problem is exacerbated by using bone fractures as the outcome of interest. Only about 2,600 of the 25,871 participants provided baseline and follow-up blood samples for analysis. So, it sounds like it's a huge study, 26,000 people, but you didn't get the right data on most of these folks. Only 1,551 experienced fractures during the course of the study. And what was the overlap between actually having the blood levels pre and post and having a fracture? Not good at all. So it's conceivable that these two populations really had no overlap. While such an extreme would be statistically unlikely, we nevertheless can't know the extent to which data from one of these groups applied to the other. Now, this whole thing reminds me of that article by John, and I'm going to butcher it. I call it Ioannidis. I used to call it Ioannidis. And, it's called, I'm not the only one that butchers his name. It's Greek. Dr. Ioannidis is a researcher, physician at Stanford, and he wrote this article, and the title is self-explanatory: Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. It was published in PLOS, the Public Library of Science, in 2005. It was the most accessed article ever. Now it gets, that kind of title sounds like it's going to be an editorial. This was not an editorial. This was deep statistical discussion. And I don't share this very often, but my favorite class at Hopkins, when I was going through the MPH training myself, was a PhD level statistics class. And one of the things that I learned there, it was a difficult class. it was one of the things that I remember. One of the questions on one of the quizzes took hours, and most people would have thought you could answer that question in about three minutes. But you really just, you had to understand the subtleties of all of the assumptions that was built on. And that's exactly what Dr. Ioannidis's article is about. And that's unfortunately exactly what happens with science, medical science. You know, you've heard the term, statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. That's one of those things where, again, it's an assumption, but once you start digging into the assumptions that's based on, that's not true. Statistics actually lie. And that's, in fact, the big issue that drives a lot of what's going on here in Dr. Ioannidis's paper. You see, there's a thing called Bayesian probabilities. I think it was Thomas Bayes. You know, he came up with the point that we think we're measuring statistics in a vacuum. We rarely ever are. We're usually measuring statistics that is already that are being generated in a real world. And in the real world, there's a high probability of bias. For example, you could tell the guys that wrote that designed the vital study certainly appear, once you go through every one of the areas where they're making assumptions, they sound like these guys who really didn't, they came at it from a bias that supplementation probably doesn't work. Here's another, so that's actually one of the keystones of Dr. Ioannidis's paper, why most published research findings are false. Number one, we assume that it's statistics. It's not statistics which can come in a vacuum. It's statistics which are that are based on Bayesian probabilities, in other words, real world, and they were based on a lot of assumptions that really were biases of the people that were collecting the study, designing the study, and most cases were not even aware that they were biased. I'm biased. Every one of us. There's not a single one of us that's a human being that is not biased. Unfortunately, most of us don't know our biases. Others can see them better than we can. One of the second core concept that Dr. Ioannidis's article was based on is the high probability of underpowered study numbers. So we saw that in this article as well. It comes out saying, look, we looked at 25,000, I think it was like 25,000 people. Well, wait a minute. No, you didn't. Go back and find out what number of people you actually had a supplementation value on, a post-supplementation value on, compare that to a group. And again, we're finding that's not, you can't even pull that out of the write-up of the article, but it starts to become really, really clear that the numbers, even in this 25,000 subjects study, weren't 25,000. They weren't, probably doesn't look like it was even 1,000. And again, once you start looking at the specific study question, it was a tiny, tiny fraction of that. So the reality is, he was right again. There's another underpinning of high probability, underpowered study numbers. So then his other item was there's actually a low probability of true hypothesis. Now, what does that mean? It actually has several arms and legs. One of the most common things, though, ends up having to do with publish or perish. You don't see articles where people are saying, my study hypothesis is that most human beings have 2 arms and 2 legs. I mean, that's very obvious. You're going to find that that's true, but it's not significant. So that's never going to be published. So if you're in that publish or perish world, your job, your ability to bring home income depends on your ability to find something that's surprising. Well, why is it surprising? Because it's not what most people observe on a day-to-day basis. There's a pretty low probability of actually nailing that one. So, as I said before, there's a couple of really good quotes about statistics. One of them is that statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. That's wrong. Statistics actually lie, and most of the people that misinform with statistics aren't really liars. They don't mean to be. They just don't understand all of the biases they brought to the table. Now, I would say this: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Yeah. So there you go. That's my my take on the vital study. If you'll give us the transition, Gilbert, we will go into Q&A. So just as you'll notice, I got a little bit discombobulated there, a little bit awkward, because I realized I had my my little AirPod in my ear right when we were getting ready to start. I took it out. When I did, it shut down all of my ability to hear anything, and it had me going for a few minutes. So, so much for that, and thank you for your patience. Now, wanted to do a shout out for a old business partner of mine, E.L. Roche. He's joined as a premium member for the channel. Thank you so much, EL. And again, this information's getting out to the world. Our number 5 largest downloads of our podcasts is going to a country you might be surprised to hear, China. You know, and I say this all the time. I'm not a big fan of the Chinese government, but I'm a big fan of the Chinese people, and I am very excited that they're able to get this information and save lives. So here's the next one. John Pecho, good morning, Dr. Brewer. OGTT results are in from last Wednesday, 120 at 2 hours. That stuff tasted terrible. What a jolt. What's the acceptable range? You should be 100 or less at 2 hours, John. And the question really is, what were you at half an hour and 1 hour? Dwight Baldwin, hello. The other question is, did you not, it sounds like you just got an OGTT and you didn't get insulin. It would have been nicer had you had insulin with those as well, because we're already telling that you've got insulin resistance. You're not metabolizing glucose at an optimal level. So the more information we can find around that, the better. Thank you for sharing that. The other thing I'll say, if you see your lab ranges probably said you were totally fine. And that's true, or at least you're totally within the normal ranges. Now we get back into those statistics. Back to Ioannidis's article, he said 0.05, 1 in 20, is not a great number to use for statistics. That's what they used on your laboratory ranges, John. That's what the labs typically use. And when you think about it, if 90% of insulin resistance is not diagnosed, then, and if over 2/3 of us have it by the time we're age 60, if half of us have it by the time we're age 30, start thinking about those statistics and probabilities. That's why the labs, and I see this all the time, people will get their OGTT or their insulin survey they may not bring it to me because they read the numbers from the labs and say, well, I'm fine. And no, they're not. And a couple of them, full-blown diabetes, and the lab said they were fine. Again, just, what was it? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So, Dwight Baldwin, hello, Dr. Brewer. I've been a fan of taking ice baths, but haven't done it for a year. What are the cardiovascular risks of taking an ice bath? It's the same as a cardiovascular risk of doing anything else that's going to cause a sudden jolt, like doing a high-intensity interval training. There's a thing called the polar plunge, which is a way of making money for charities. When I was at Toyota, I used to do myself and a few other senior management used to do the polar plunge. And there was one of the senior managers whose wife said, no, I don't want you doing that. I'm afraid you're going to have a heart attack. Yes, people have had heart attacks running. I think it was Jim Fixx that did. People have had heart attacks while having sex. People have had heart attacks while doing just about anything. But when you start looking at the probabilities, and they have, having sex doesn't cause a heart attack. Jumping in a water bath an ice water bath doesn't cause heart attacks. And once you begin to understand the actual mechanism, you begin to realize it's not epinephrine causing your arteries to squeeze like that. That's not what's happening. It's like what happened with Tim Russert. You've got a lot of inflammation. That's more of a chronic disease. It's an acute impact when you have the heart attack, when the clot actually happens, but it's a chronic problem that causes the clot. It's not an acute issue. Good question. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. Is there a good test for arterial stiffness? Yeah, Todd Eldridge, that wrote the book with me, does a lot of what they call vascular testing, and I'm not such a big fan of it. There is some reality. There is some, like most things, there's some good points behind that kind of testing. And again, you can see, Todd, you can look it up, Cardio Risk, CARDIORISK, Todd Eldridge, and you can get some testing done there. But again, I'm not a big fan because the vast majority of people don't do what John's doing, finding out the major risk, assessing the major risk factors, getting an OGTT, getting an insulin survey. They start going to looking at, okay, do I have uric acid, or which is, it's a risk factor, or do I have FH, or do I have arterial stiffness, or do I have high ApoB? Somebody gave me some good feedback the other day when we're talking about ApoB. The bottom line is we're majoring in the minors so often. Let's stop majoring in the minors and let's check on the major first. Let's make sure that you've got good carb metabolism. Robert Weiss, good morning from the North Georgia mountains. I think we have an equation section. I think we need an equation section on a website somewhere. So we have a rough guide for questions like triglyceride over HDL, ApoB, ApoA, MACR. Thoughts? Well, I don't really look that much about ApoB over ApoA. That's one of the things the labs tends to do. And yeah, if somebody wants to start one of those, I'd be happy to help contribute to it, myself and Jesus as well. Right now, again, we're focused on getting more care for more people, better access. So that's what we're spending most of our time doing. Bart Robinson, good suggestion. Also LP(a). Fluffy Cookie. Hello, Fluffy Cookie. Robert Weiss, we're getting so many really good markers, it's hard keeping them all straight. Well, Robert, that's true. Again, I would say, let's start with the thing that causes 80 to 90% of this problem, glucose metabolism. Margaret D, good morning from Winnipeg, Canada. I'm finally on to your new schedule. Thank you, Margaret D. Glad to hear that you are. ET himself, we have liftoff. So I think ET was missing it as well. Glad to have you here. Rebecca Greenwell Metzger from Jacksonville. Quincy Street. Thanks, Doc. Bobby Ocampo, Mabu Hai. Long and beautiful life. ET, 50% of peer-reviewed medical reviews have been proven to be fake, and up to 80% by a big research long-term study from Greenland, England. They are not associated with anyone, completely independent 3 years ago. Well, there's actually a huge issue right now with AI's writing stuff, artificial intelligence, and a whole lot of, as you might predict, a whole lot of unethical and made up research, especially coming out of China, but it's not just China. There's a bunch of places where this is a major problem right now in research. And that wasn't really the issue that Ioannidis was talking about. He was talking about, more than anything else, unrecognized bias by the research and study team. What you're talking about is recognized intent, nefarious, bad publication. And that has been growing dramatically just over the past 5 years. Basil Tiffany, I've read several studies reporting that the virus attacks the lining of our arteries. Well, Basil, that's good to know. When you say the virus these days, most people think COVID. And COVID does have some potential impact there. But you didn't specify. ET, any chance in doing an in-depth video on how vitamin C skews the A1C test? It's an interesting question. You see that a lot. One of my patients was just very knowledgeable, pointed that out to me one time many years ago. And, I learn more from patients than I do from anybody. David Griffin, currently waiting on hospital date for triple bypass surgery. Well, thank you for sharing that, David. Good luck with it. And, I wonder if this is the time to quote the ischemia trial or the Orbita trial or the Courage trial. All those trials showed that putting new arteries through using a stent or even a bypass would prevent heart attack. The bottom line is they don't, David. Thank you for sharing this. And I'm not, here's the thing. Don't pin your hopes on preventing a heart attack on plumbing, surgery. The research is crystal clear. It does not. Plumbing surgery does not prevent heart attack or stroke. In the vast majority of the cases, that's what your doctor's telling you. I'm not telling you don't have it. What I'm telling you is it's your lifestyle, what you eat, how much you eat, your percent body fat. Those critical things are going to drive your probability of having a heart attack or not. Surgery will not. Thank you again for sharing. And I hope and it's a tough message, but it's something you need to be very aware of. Plumbing's not going to prevent a heart attack. It's not going to prevent a clot. And clots are what cause heart attacks. Fluffy Cookie, meet the press, I think. Thank you so much, Fluffy Cookie. And I think you're right, because he was really good at taking politicians that said one thing 4 years ago, and then in the present, they were saying just the opposite. So it was like, meet the press and tell us why you're saying the opposite of what you said 4 years ago. LPG 12338 Thank you so much, LPG. Very interesting products, Arterial and Endocalyx Pro and Nanobac. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much, LPG. And yes, we did do a deeper look on those. And I was surprised at the quality of evidence that they have now. Paul Trainer, BSc, hi. Robert Weiss, David, have you had drusins indicating E? Not sure what that means. Rebecca Greenwell, hi from Jacksonville, Florida. Fluffy Cookie, I'm on pravastatin. Good for you, Fluffy. Tom Burney, TV show suggestion: lifestyles of the rich and, and insured. Well, it's a good point. I mean, that was one of the frustrating parts of our program. When we originally came out, similar to a bail deneen type of practice, and those are uninsured usually. I mean, not uninsured. They did not accept insurance. I didn't accept it either because, as I've said before, insurance was geared towards, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It's here, let me give you a script and run out and go to the next room. Now they're beginning to, and that sounds critical. I understand why. It's really hard to develop a way of insuring doctors for what actually changes people's life, and that is education. How do you pay a doctor if the doctor's saying, well, I spent some time talking to him about X, Y, and Z? I mean, insurance, fee for service was the thing for decades. It's been difficult. Bobby Ocampo just visited another interventional cardiologist and recommending stress test here in the Philippines. Well, as we said, stress tests will give you a little bit of information about cardiovascular endurance, and there is some correlation between cardiovascular endurance and cardiovascular risk. But as you know, Bobby, you've been on this channel, you made a lot of comments, you've demonstrated that you understand, for example, assume you're diabetic until proven otherwise. I've seen that quote many times from you, and I think that's accurate. So it's the metabolism that drives heart attack and stroke, not the plumbing. Ricky the Gun 1, can you effectively perform your own glucose tolerance test with a CGM? I've done that. I did a couple of videos. I actually did. Here was one of them that I did. I was trying to make the point that Mott's applesauce is just full of sugar. And so I did an OGTT using Mott's applesauce, and my glucose went out the roof. The answer is yes. And I've done some other videos where I showed you, I mean, you can go to a local chain drugstore here drugstore here in the US, like Walgreens or CVS, and you can get these fructose things. I would recommend the 100 grams. You can get 250 grams. Take your blood sugar, fast for 8 hours, get your blood sugar, confirm it with a finger stick. Then take 75 to 100 grams of glucose, and then watch your blood sugars. At 1 hour, you should be 120 or less. I mean, you can go up to 140 at the half hour point, but at 1 hour, you should be 120 or less. At 2 hours, you should be 100 or less. If you're higher than that, you don't have an optimum carb metabolism. But it's a great question, Ricky. Thank you so much for bringing it up. Like I said, I've done a few videos showing people how to do that. It's just that people don't. It's so frustrating. Jane Ling, hi, Doc, from the UK. Have you heard of HeartCare Corp and their new AI ECG, which they claim is on a par with angiogram for diagnosis of atherosclerosis? Sounds promising. Jane, good to meet you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the question, and thank you for telling us where you're from. I've got patients in the UK. I'm not quite as excited as you are because I'm not very excited about an angiogram. What does an angiogram tell us? It tells us whether there's plaque. I don't really want to know whether there's plaque. I mean, we know the older some people are, by the time, oh gosh, I mean, you can go in and you can look at some of the calcium score numbers. The probability of having zero plaque at age 60 is what, 30%? A little bit less if you're a male, maybe a little bit more if you're a female, and it decreases each year beyond that. That's not really the question. And that's the question that an angiogram will answer: do you have plaque? But that's not the question that tells us about whether or not you have risk. The question that tells us whether you have risk or not is, do you have soft plaque? Do you have inflamed plaque? And an angiogram doesn't tell you that. So a new technology that promises to be almost as good and competitive with angiogram doesn't do a whole lot for me. Thank you. That was a great question. It gave me the opportunity to go down an important topic. Rebecca Greenwell, I have a calcium score of over 1,500. My cardiologist wants me to take 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin. I want to take 10. What do you think? I think you should probably take 5 or less. Because you don't need 40. You don't even need 10 to help with the inflammation piece. But even more so, what I think you need to do is have an OGTT with insulin response. We need to know what your, how well, is this your major challenge? We also need to look at your other risk factors, because cardiovascular disease is a multi-risk factor problem. Do you have Lp(a) problems? Do you have FH issues? Do you have rheumatoid arthritis or any of the other inflammatory arthritides spilling some inflammation into that metabolic soup? We need to understand your metabolism. That's the most important thing. That's far more important than whether you take a statin or not, any level of statin. So thank you, Rebecca. Great question, great opportunity to wail away at my version of reality. Bart Robinson, I'd personally never take 40 milligrams for any reason, just my opinion. Well, there you have it. And I don't think I've ever prescribed 40. Yeah, to your point, Bart, I wouldn't do it. Rick Folia, are you familiar with the Randall Cycle? Oh yeah, I saw that the other day, but I don't remember. If so, would like to see a video about it and what part of insulin resistance pays. Dang it, now that people are starting to ask about the Randall Cycle, I'll have to go back and take another look, get a little bit deeper. Unless didn't it have something to do with the mitochondria, I thought. Bart Robinson, Rick, good suggestion. I know Bart K talks about that a lot on his channel. I'm assuming he's talking about Randall Cycle, and I do, that Bart K does sound familiar. John Tocho, I read the book and Johnson's precursor book. Dr. Perlmutter is an excellent teacher and writer. He is. He's really, really good. He brings a lot of stuff to the table that saves a lot of lives, I'm absolutely sure. This focus on grain, the focus on fructose. Bobby Ocampo, I hope we can have this Medicare program with our PhilHealth in the Philippines. It's interesting. If you would have thought that you couldn't do that in other countries, let me tell you, I was talking to, I'm not going to identify the owner, but it's the owner of a large Medicare Advantage program, basically large primary care program here in the States. And it was very interesting. The last time I talked to him, he said, you know what? I'm starting one of these in India. Talk about the challenges of poverty. And here's what, unless I'm mistaken, it was the $5. I think what he was saying, he was signing people up for primary care for a subscription of $5 a month. It might have been $5 a year, but I think it was $5 a month. Now, it didn't include prescriptions. It didn't include, any procedures or stuff like that, but it included all the primary care they needed. So yes, this concept is starting to get out there. And if you can make it work in India, you certainly should be able to make it work in the Philippines. Bart Robinson, although Bart K is a bit too abrasive for me sometimes, I see that. You know, somebody asked me about, oh gosh, what was the recent one? Having a senior moment. Oh, it was the clot thickens guy. Um, you know, people, there was a lot of questions about him recently. And, you know, the bottom line is I saw and read and listened to some of his stuff, and I'm a fan of his too. But it's like, pretty soon I got really tired of hearing how everything everybody says is wrong, but not so much focus on what's right. And you get a lot of that with the great debunkers. That's what I call them. You know, I've worked a lot with a lot of people that are the great debunkers. And it's a wonderful position to be in. If you're debunking somebody else and you're just pointing out the errors that somebody else has made, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I spent some time doing that today, but I don't think you're, yes, you are making some contribution to the human, you know, the human experience by pointing out where somebody made an error, but that it's really too easy. You need to get out there. Who was it? It was Teddy Roosevelt. That's, you know, he's got that quote, and I used to have it on my desk. Somebody gave that to me about, you know what? It's the guy that's out on the playing field. He's got mud on his face, sweat, looks like crap. He's working hard. He's trying to get stuff done. You know, that person's a little bit more admirable than the guys up in the crowd that are sitting there criticizing what he does. So I'll leave it at that point. John Keefe, Dr. Brewer and his staff are going to save many lives as his Medicare preventive program spread across the country. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that. And that's clearly the plan. Now, that sounds like a very audacious plan, but I'm confident enough to think we're going to get it done. We're already saving lives. Now, if we can start getting this specific care driven out of this understanding to people specifically, not just theory or just facts on a YouTube show, we certainly plan to be able to save more lives. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate that. Rick Foley, Ed Bart Robinson. Yeah, and Bart K also says insulin resistance is a construct that can't be measured. Oh, I did. I saw that comment, and it's like, I got the same, what? What do you mean insulin resistance can't be measured? I do it all day, every day. John Tocho just did it. He's got a level of insulin resistance. I mean, he shared with us a few minutes ago. Now, he didn't give me, I obviously want a lot more data because I can draw a much deeper, nuanced, clearer picture. But John is at least 20 points off of his 2-hour optimum number. Well, what do you mean it can't be measured? John, Dr. Perlmutter cited 4 NCBI linked studies that are very persuasive. Are you right? And you are right. Not new. Goes back to the late 1800s. Thank you so much, John. It's true. It does. I mean, like I said, it's a criticism. We're all humans. We all have our issues, and no human endeavor is perfect. It doesn't make me any less of a David Perlmutter fan. He's doing some great work. He's doing God's work. He's saving people, because when people recognize the stuff that he's talking about, it's saving lives. But you're right. A lot of it's just like, this was here over 200 years ago. Why are we, what's so new? Fort Worth West Side, good to hear from you. I haven't heard from you in a while. Does Medicare Advantage also cover this program? Yes, we are doing applications for Medicare Advantage as part of what we do. You know, Medicare Advantage, when I was doing this, I used to be the chief science officer for a large company doing this. A company whose acronym is PPLLC, Better Health Group, several other names. Very good company. They had 80,000 covered lives when I was the chief science officer. And my role as the chief science officer was all day, every day, teach their doctors how to recognize these problems in a metabolic state, not wait until they had the heart attack. And they have grown from 80,000 to 150,000. Now, one of them was the acquisition of a large part of our Alabama program, 90% of it. So they're doing very, very well. Medicare is growing. Let me give you the statistics in a different way. When Physician Partners started, it was like 2% of the country. It was a pilot program for Medicare. We want docs to be engaged. We want the provider programs to have risk, but every time they've done it in the past 100 years, doctors went bankrupt. So you can't really do it that way. So they kept trying, though, because it was good for the patient, it was good for the doc. Because if the doc is not engaged, they just send the patient to the ER, or they just, write a script and say, here, I'm out of here. When you get the doctor engaged, they realize, most doctors know that it's education that's going to change health, and because it's lifestyle, not a prescription. Even in this world of prescription-driven healthcare, so they continued to try to make this work. They've gotten multiple different types of programs. It sounds like alphabet soup now. It's very confusing to help doctors get into it, but it's there because it works, because people are getting well and they're enjoying it. They enjoy the experience and it's better for them. They have grown from a pilot project back when they started. Now, when I was back there, 6-8 years ago, it was 21% of Medicare. Now it's 40. Is it 48 or 43%? Somebody do a fact check. You can look it up on Google real quick. It's almost half of people on Medicare are now on Medicare Advantage. And you say, oh, no, wait a minute. That's HMO. That's bad. You know what? Things called CAPS and HOS are triple weighted, meaning if the patient doesn't enjoy the experience and feel like they've been treated in very fairly and better than they were in other places, the docs don't make it in that space. So, good question about Medicare Advantage. Black Tengu, since switching from Lipitor to Crestor and going low carb, my C-reactive protein dropped from 0.12 to 0.08. Well, good for you, Black Tengu. Glad to hear it. Bart, Rick, yes, very confusing indeed. E.T., Bart K likely does not know what he's talking about. Well, I'm not going to comment about that. Black, I took 4,000 international units of vitamin D for about a year, and I believe it caused my kidney stones, which put me just 2 days away from losing a kidney and or septicemia, according to my urologist. Vitamin D has killed people. Be aware, it's not totally harmless. When I start talking about that, sometimes we'll get these people that want to dogpile and bomb the thing and start making all kinds of comments. And a lot of comments we'll see is, oh, vitamin D levels way over 100 are fine. No, they're not. Just look up the science. And when you get vitamin D levels over 100, people start getting into problems. And I've had a few patients come to me like that. The most common reason in the US for getting those high levels and dangerous levels of vitamin D is that they take these mega doses, these 25,000 international units. Those mega doses are meant for once weekly, and people are taking them once daily. And that's where you tend to get into a problem. RFB 321, ET himself, do you know what well, it sounds like we're getting into a little debate. See if we can. Tom Birney, CCM, or is it called, come on. Okay, John, 117 watching and only 39 thumbs up. We can do better. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that. So what he's saying is this. if you're enjoying the content or you're feeling like it's helpful enough to be spending your time watching it, maybe you ought to recommend it to other people. And if you click a thumbs up, that's one way of telling the AI, the algorithm, the artificial intelligence that drives YouTube, hey, there are adults watching this. They're getting good information out of it. They're getting information that they would recommend for other people. So then it recommends it to other people. Thank you so much, John. ET himself, Randall Cycle. Drax of the North, up here in the Great White North, I take 5,000 international units of D3, along with 200 micrograms of K2, MK7, October through March. Is there an appropriate D3 to K7 dosage ratio? So, no, you need to know your D3 levels, and you need, in my mind, to take anywhere between 400 and 400 micrograms and multiples, 400 micrograms or up of K2. And when you look at the combination pills, they just don't do the combinations that way. When people ask me about my recommendations on D3 dosage, I do recommend that most people just go ahead. You can presumptively supplement, and I would recommend presumptively supplementing with 5,000 international units. Nobody's ever gotten toxic based on that, at least that I've seen in the literature. And I've looked at the literature pretty hard for this specific issue. But I would suggest that after a month of taking supplementation, you go ahead and get a blood study. And I don't recommend levels of 20 to 40 like you tend to see in the labs. I recommend levels of 60 to 90. I don't recommend levels over 90 like you see with a lot of, quote, preventive providers. Bart Robinson, hit the like button, people. Thank you so much, Bart. ET, thank you guys. Yes, thank you so much. Fort Worth, I remember a study years back that claimed vitamins were a waste of money. Yes, expensive urine is what they called it. And I used to feel that way too. And guess what? I think the guys that designed the vital study that we talked about today, they probably are in that camp that vitamins make expensive urine. One of the problems with this whole expensive urine and vitamins thing is that vitamins do tend to have subtle impact. Most vitamins do have science and evidence behind them, and I've looked at it, because I wasn't planning on getting into supplements that much when I started the YouTube channel, but once you get on YouTube, the demand for supplement-related information is big. And the scientific review of supplements is really bad. Because you tend to get two camps. One, people who just inherently, bias is rife in the supplement discussion industry. So, for example, if you go to Joe Mercola or Eric Berg, both of whom I think have some really good content, and both of whom I think have some really good supplements, and both of whom I think have some really significant bias in terms of what they do. So, that's the classic. People that are praising supplements usually have some significant bias. Quite often, bias generated by the fact that they make and sell them. Then you have the other side, and you'll tend to see that mostly with the classically trained doctors who say, I would get that one, and I do. I get that when I'm recruiting classically trained doctors to orient them to prevention and help them get started. They'll start talking about, I got all these patients they need to talk to you. They want to know about vitamins. And they use that tone of voice, vitamins. Well, that group is biased as well. They don't know anything about vitamins. They've never studied it. They've just heard in the doctor's lounge at the hospital that vitamins don't do anything. Well, that's not true either. People are lazy, and there's only so much time in a day, and there's only so much time in a medical a medical education. Yeah. Pardon me, you've got me headed off in a bunch of directions. When I went through medical education, I was mad. And I was mad because hours and so much time, years of effort in a typical medical education are wasted. I went to the Medical University of South Carolina, which is a really good school, but the first couple of years they taught you what's called basic science, and they had basic science, this PhD physiologist who'd never seen a patient, never been a doctor, and then anatomist PhD, all of them teaching what they do, which had nothing, well, a little bit to do with medicine because it was in the medical field. It was, see you later, Jeff. It was in the medical field. It was, anatomy, physiology, but it really didn't have any, they'd never seen a patient. They didn't know what it was like to see a patient. Those you'd get hour after hour, week after week, month after month, year after year of that kind of information in your medical training. And how much time do you get regarding supplements? How much time do you get regarding diet? How much time do you get regarding how do you really look at evidence behind a study, epidemiology? I mean, it's just like, talk about majoring on the minors. And here's one of the reasons why. You get these people, they're running a medical school, they're responsible for running a medical school. I'm gonna be quiet. The bottom line is, I need to read the rest of your question. The people claim that vitamins are a waste of money. They failed to realize that they're actually using artificially created vitamins. Well, that's only part of the issue. One of the other issues, Fort Worth, is that a lot of studies are done on whether or not they impact death. There's so many things that cause death. The number one cause of death, heart attack, things that we know impact heart attack rates quite often don't impact death rates because you've got to have 3 times the impact on heart attack rate just to make it significant in terms of total deaths. Again, just another hard lesson about statistics, which most people don't think of. Clearly, the doctors that prescribe these things don't understand. And the doctors that say that supplements don't help don't understand either. HMS, Dr. Ford, we should clone you. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thumbs up with an ET on petard. For those of you who don't know where that's coming from, that's one of my favorite sayings. It comes from Middle Ages when they first started having explosives. They had these guys called, and they had petards, and they would run up and they would one of the ways they would do this. So they're attacking the castle door. They have this explosive on a spike. They run up, they jam the spike into the castle door and hope that the explosion is going to happen and hope that they can get out of the way before the petard blew. And quite often that didn't happen. So if you got blown up with your own explosive, that's called you got hoist on your own petard. And that happens so often. We've got some people that are messing some things up in the business side of the Alabama project right now, and they're getting ready to get hoist on their own petard because they're getting ready to lose a lot of their own benefit by trying to, own petard. I love the name. Focus on fractures is weak. Then to cavalierly report that other uses for calcium is also low is low-grade propaganda. Well, maybe not if you're a true believer in your bias on petard. And my read on those people is that they are true believers on their own bias. Propaganda, on the other hand, implies, if not states outright, that that this may or may not be, is not true. and therefore you're just, trying to move people to your side. Researchers that lost money in calcium futures should not be believed. Good point. Thank you, Petard. Bobby Ocampo, it seems that some pharma sponsors study to discredit competition for their products. Oh, no question. There's a ton of that. I mean, there's such big money in pharma. And let me just ask you something. Everybody wants to blame the doctors and big pharma for drugs. You call pharma, people say, why do you call pharma? It's actually the pharmaceutical, it's an acronym, but it's the big pharma industry. And again, those of us who watch channels like this, those of us who are private citizens, those of us who are doctors, love to blame things on big pharma. We love to, when we're ranting on supplements, we love to rant on people that are making money from supplements. But let me make a point. Having been a doctor, having been a YouTube medical scientist, I can tell you, when you're a doctor, the demand by the patient population to give me a drug that's going to fix my problem because I don't want to do the lifestyle changes. And the demand, that's what you see as a doctor. And as a YouTube medical scientist, you hear the YouTube version of that, and that is, give me a supplement that I can take so I don't have to change my lifestyle. That's what happens. The demand for both of those is overwhelming. So you can blame big pharma if you want. You can blame the supplement manufacturers if you want. You can blame the doctors if you want. But they're all responding to demand. And where does that demand come from? Let me make sure that I've read the rest of this. I'm sorry, I got going on my own. Maybe I hoist myself on my own petard. There's a great app called D-Minder, estimates vitamin D. Oh, okay, blood levels based on sun exposure, supplementation, and obesity. I will tell you, I see people all the time. I don't believe sun exposure is significant. So Drax says it's, I believe, created by Michael Hollick, MD, PhD, professor of medicine. Why not just do a blood test? That sort of reminds me of the scene in, the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he comes running up in the marketplace and he runs into this giant guy that's got a scimitar and he's flipping it around. And everybody's really impressed with and wondering what he's going to do. And he just pulls out his pistol and shoots him. I mean, I can understand having all of these estimates, but why not just get a blood study? Dennis Williamson at Black Tango, thank you for your N+1. I took 5,000 international units of vitamin D, and while my kidneys survived, my results were lacking. I now follow David Jocker's recommendation. I include sun vitamin D from UVB. Good luck on that. E.L. Roche, thank you, Dr. Brewer. Thank you, E.L. Thank you so much. Happy to support you and your message. I appreciate the feedback, E.L., and the support. Dennis Williamson, vitamin D from UVB lasts 3 times longer than a supplement. Chinese medicine. John Keefe, didn't the VITAL study also deal with omega-3 assumption? Your thoughts on the omega-3s and cardiovascular disease? It's like aspirin. We do know that there's some positive impact. Oh, not aspirin. I was thinking of something else. Metformin. We do know there are positive impacts. The evidence is pretty hard to argue with from multiple sides. But we're not entirely sure what causes it. And same thing with statins in reality. We have some idea that it's cardiovascular inflammation. With metformin, we have some idea that it's decreasing gluconeogenesis by the liver, but I personally suspect it also has to do with what metformin does to the colonic, to the microbiome, the gut biome. Where was I going with this? Omega-3s. The assumption is that omega-3s decrease clotting, just like aspirin. Are we sure that that's the mechanism, or is there something else going on? That's my question. Tom Bierney. I also have I've got a bunch of questions about omega-3s. You know, the other one is how much of this is one of them versus the other. There's a major debate right now about maybe oh gosh, now I'm having another senior moment. I'm trying to remember the three specific ones. Two of the three are very common, and you want to get one and maybe not so much the other. And the most recent trials from Big Pharma might indicate that the other one actually competes with it. Now, if you could get anything out of what I just said, I'm very impressed. Unfortunately, I often have word finding challenges. Can't remember the names of them. They're on the tip of my tongue. I use them all the time, but I just can't remember it right now. Tom Bierney, natural D3 from sunshine coupled with supplementation, exercise daily. Well, thank you, Tom. And I'll just tell you, I get patients all the time. They live in Florida. The husband's out. It's a couple. The husband's out playing golf all day, every day, or 4 days a week, and the wife never goes out, and her D3 levels are higher than the males. Here's what I suspect. I suspect that body fat is a bigger determinant than sunshine, because males tend to carry more body fat. Paul Pelico, and are all statins the same? Rosuvastatin? No, they're not at all the same. No, I only use two, rosuvastatin, low dose, and versions of pitavastatin. And that's a big, long bunny hole to go down. I've already talked some about some of the ones that I don't, one of them that I clearly don't use, and that is the most popular one, and that is Lipitor. Melissa, what statin do you think is more effective after someone's had an MI? Crestor or Lipitor? I don't use Lipitor. Don't use it. I've had one patient that couldn't tolerate anything else, and we went through like 4 other statins, but he had come to me on Lipitor. I was still a little bit skeptical, but you know what? He's the patient. I was just the doctor, and he ended up back on Lipitor. I had an MI in July, myocardial infarction, heart attack, for those of you who are not aware. LP(a) 350. I have to tell you, I work with a lot of people with LP(a) problems, and I don't think LP(a) of 350 should be assumed to be the core issue there, Melissa. Taking Lipitor 80 a day, oh my gosh. For cholesterol lowering, it's probably not cholesterol. It's probably, I appreciate you sharing it, and pardon me if you're seeing me making a lot of nonverbals, but it probably isn't cholesterol. It's probably carb metabolism. That's at least 80% of the problem population-wide. There are other risk factors. Cholesterol can be a risk factor with, if it's like 200, LDL of 200, not total cholesterol. And that's pretty unusual. It's about 1 in 500 families, 1 in 200 families, depending on some of the gene pools that you look at. And so cholesterol lowering is not the key thing. Changing your metabolism is the key. Melissa, I read somewhere that Crestor might be better for inflammation. Yes, it is. And that's why I use Crestor and I don't use Lipitor. Tom Bierney, statistically significant is not clinically relevant or effective or clinically significant. In other words, statistically significant may not be clinically significant. Really good point. That was what today's show is about. Melissa, I had an MI a month after having COVID, so I do think it affects the lining of your arteries. I do too, Melissa. Tom Bierney, hey doc, your bias is giving a damn about regular patients. That's true. Thank you so much. Obviously, that's a major compliment, and I appreciate that. JCA, I think you mentioned uric acid as a risk factor. What about those with gout and cardiovascular risk and dietary pharmacological management for them? Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit confused about what you're saying, because the question that you're asking seems to me to be immediately obvious. Uric acid is a risk factor. Gout is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, not for gout. And yes, you do want to manage that. So there are several things to do with it. One of those is to minimize your body fat. Another is to decrease your intake of fructose. I don't know if I'm actually responding to your question, because it just, I thought that we covered a lot of that before. John Luigi, good to hear from you again. Hi from Milan. Thanks for what you do. Thank you so much, John Luigi. The home of, what is that clotting factor variation? We talked about it once. I had a few patients with it, and I'm blanking on that too. You know, just keep forgetting all these names. Chris Linky, I take 2 grams of niacin a day. The flush doesn't really bother me too much. Just curious, is it better to take all the niacin at one time, or to take smaller doses multiple times during the day? I've been asked that question many times, Chris. I cannot see any, I have not found any evidence to indicate it matters. Greg Wilson, thanks, Doc. At 8 cents a day, niacin tab, bought my lipids profile in line. You know, it's very interesting you bring that up, Greg. Niacin is the only thing that increases HDL, decreases LDL, decreases triglycerides, and decreases LP(a). And yet, the standard medical community talks about how it's no good. Niacin is like vitamin D, by the way. It's one of those supplements that's not entirely harmless. People have died from niacin just like they've died from vitamin D levels. Vitamin D can wreck your kidneys. Niacin can wreck your liver. So don't take it unless you need it. Vegan Life, what's niacin for? Well, you know, I wish I'd read your question before I answered that last one. I take systemic enzymes. Which enzymes do you take? Enzymes are proteins. Proteins tend to get eaten up in the stomach on the way down. So it doesn't mean nobody should ever take enzymes. It just means you should think about it. Kofi Adega, writing from Ghana. I thought that sounded like an African name. Thank you so much, Kofi. I do not think, I can't, well, I started to say I don't remember ever, we did have somebody from Ghana before. Can you please comment on the VITAL study wing regarding the impact, so now we're going to get specific, regarding the impact of vitamin D on autoimmune disease. Compared to placebo, the control group improved by 22%. That's a good question, Kofi, and I'm sorry, I cannot answer that. And I'm guessing maybe you have a special interest in autoimmune disease. Interesting question. I will say this. One of the, because of what we talked about today with the problems with studies, New England Journal published studies as well as any others. Be careful about taking one set of information from one set of studies, and it's based on what we talked about, the fact that most studies are wrong. So you consider one study as a signal. If you see it again and again and again and again and again, it's no longer a signal. It's probably approaching reality. Good point. Mike Scarborough, don't statins push you down the diabetic highway a lot? 80 milligrams of Lipitor will. 5 milligrams of rosuvastatin, no. That's the point. The low dose statins, like 5 of rosuvastatin or less, don't really push you down the diabetes highway, and they do help with inflammation, cardiovascular inflammation. That's why that's, the lower dose for some of those is a better choice. Kofi, writing from Ghana, can you? Oh, okay. It looks like we got another copy of that. We're getting multiple copies of the same thing. Let's see if we can get to, okay. Jim Dandy, colchicine is used for gout. Interestingly, also used now for various heart conditions. Yes, you know what? Oh gosh, now I am having, what's happening? I'm doing a little bit of fasting today. And when I start fasting, I start having, one of the first things to go for me is word recall. I'm trying to think of the fellow at not Hopkins, at Harvard, that does all of the studies on specific to cardiovascular inflammation. He did his original studies with Gavin Blake. Paul Ridker did a study where he looked at, was it colchicine? I think he did. I think he looked at colchicine as a preventative for cardiovascular disease. It didn't work. But does that mean that cardiovascular disease is not an inflammatory disease? No, it just means there's multiple types of inflammation, and that colchicine just didn't happen to work for prevention of cardiovascular disease. Bart Robinson, Malcolm Kendrick, the plot thickens. Yep, Malcolm. Like I said, I'm a fan of a lot of people that I don't entirely agree with. I don't know anybody that I entirely agree with, I think. And Malcolm tends to go on and on and on. He's one of those great debunkers, more so than somebody that actually, I think, gets out on the field and actually starts doing some positive work too, just spends more time criticizing. Tom Bernier, your thoughts on inserting electrode fibers and periodically firing when docs, what to me, that's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Periodic inserting electrodes, what kind of electrodes into what, and periodically firing what? When doctors see something funky, what is funky? So Kofi from Ghana, regarding OGTT, I did mine with Kraft Survey 75 grams. Well, Kraft Survey is 100 grams. Standard OGTT is 75 grams. So fasting glucose 5.8. Oh gosh, you're using the other numbers, which I'm US. 1 hour glucose 9.4, insulin 5.3. Kofi, whenever I see those numbers, I have to convert them back to US numbers. I apologize. If you've got time before we get to the end of the show, if you can convert those to US, I'll be more than happy. I would love to give you comments, but I'm not going to subject everybody else for me to go start looking up the numbers and translating them. Omer Feldman, Yafael, something has to be done about the fructose myth. Please, D, at least distinguish between high fructose corn syrup and friggin' orange juice. So, Omer, your comments imply to me that you think orange juice is healthy. And I don't. I mean, my brother was laughing the other day. He used to think, and I've got plenty of patients. Some of my smartest patients have started conversations with me about, wait a minute, you're telling me that it's not healthy to have 2 glasses of orange juice for breakfast in the morning? Well, Omer, have 2 glasses of orange juice, measure your blood sugar, and then tell me that it's healthy. Bart Robinson, don't drink orange juice. I would agree, Bart. I don't drink it. If you think orange juice is healthy, measure your sugar. See what it does to it. On Petard, thank you so much. Rebecca Greenwell, 6 months ago, my vitamin D level was 45. I started taking 10,000 per day, international units. Now my level's 170. Rebecca, that's dangerous. My doctor's not concerned. Do I need to have my kidneys checked? Yes, you do. You really, really do. And I would stop it until I got it below 100. Here's when you go in and look at the do a Google Science search for vitamin D level deaths and start looking at the levels. Once you get over 100, usually over 115, but that's when you start seeing kidney damage, and massive vitamin D levels can do massive kidney damage. I agree, Bart. I would agree. Jill Schwartz, do you see reduction in cardiovascular inflammation for people taking 2.5 milligrams every other day? Yes, we do. That has been documented. Dude, I got here late, but do you really have to take vitamin K with vitamin D in order for D to truly work? No, I don't think so. And to be beneficial to bones? No, I don't. I personally don't think so, but you know what? I may be showing my bias when I say that. Would getting some sun while taking vitamin K be enough? Well, it might be, but I've also demonstrated my bias against relying on sun as a source of vitamin D. David Mintz, EPA and DHA is what you were looking for. Thank you so much, David. You're exactly right. So Amaranth, now I remember the other one. Amaranth is the maker of the new omega-3 supplement. And they've put out a lot of science. Actually, when I started covering their product, they called me up and I had some good conversations with their chief scientists. And they make a really, really good point that DHA might actually be blocking the receptor for EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. So theirs is a pure EPA product. And so they're saying, really, you can't take the supplements that have both because you get a greatly degraded positive impact because the DHA is blocking or competing with EPA. Thank you again so much, David. I appreciate that. David is an international speaker on cardiovascular health and diet. He is a nutritionist, and he and I have had our own debates about carbs. We've actually ended up coming to some resolution on some of those debates. Dude, last question, but does Crestor really cause diabetes? 20 milligrams of Crestor will. 20 and 40. I've seen patients on 40. And yes, those levels will push you way down that diabetes highway. 5 or less a day, doesn't really do it. Dude, yes. Elias. Different statins interrupt the cholesterol pathway in different places. CoQ10. People ask me, you know, and I got a lot of patients, and a lot of patients ask, well, should I take CoQ10? And doc, you didn't tell me to. And yes, sometimes I forget. I do recommend CoQ10 anytime you're taking a statin. I did not one, but 2 different videos on it. And here's the reality. Once you actually, speaking of studies, I did studies on CoQ10. And once you actually start looking at the studies behind CoQ10, none of them really show anything very conclusive. So let me repeat that. Yes, I do recommend CoQ10. Yes, I do recommend CoQ10 when you are taking a statin. And yes, I have reviewed the science and the evidence in the science behind CoQ10, and it really doesn't support anything much at all. Well, here's the problem. CoQ10 is talking about core mitochondrial function. Now, you tell me, what kind of study is going to evaluate the impact of CoQ10 on your mitochondria? Is that going to be one of those things where the doctor is sticking an electrode somewhere when things look funky? Tamara Spills, doctor, your face appears flushed. Just take niacin. I did take some earlier this morning, and you're right, it does look a little bit flushed. A big thank you from my heart. Excuse the pun. That's funny. For all you do for us all. You're one of the good ones for sure. Thank you so much, Jane. I appreciate that very, very much. well, we're not interested. This is the wrong channel for that stuff. Dennis Williamson, Dr. Brewer, thank you for your focus and this forum. Dr. Gundry playfully ridicules Dr. Joseph McCullough for only being able to approach a vitamin D level of 70 from the sun while he boasts a personal 120. Well, I think 120 is a little too high. Hey, Gilbert, could you go in and ban this person? We don't need adult dating site stuff on here. Elias, Rebecca, take every third day. Eventually, vitamin D should go to about 70, then average 2,000 in summer, maybe about 3,000 in winter. And again, remember, vitamin D3 is fat soluble. And I will tell you, I'm going to reveal another of my biases, which it's a bias that came from my observation. I never would have expected this until I continued to see it over and over and over again. The males who were usually heavier, even though they played golf 4 times a week, tended to have lower vitamin D levels. And here's the other thing I see. People that are gaining weight tend to start dropping their vitamin D level. People that are losing weight tend to start increasing their vitamin D level, which makes me really suspect that their body fat is hoarding a lot of that vitamin D. Thanks, Eddie T. himself and Ford Brewer. Joseph Ajay Nemo. Hello, Doc. Excellent work. Have been taking 40,000 international units of D3 and 400 micrograms for about 2 weeks now. Please be careful about that level. Get a level, and please, I suspect yours is going to be over 100. At 2 weeks, maybe not yet, but please get a blood level and don't shoot for these 170 levels. Another excellent discussion. Thank you again. I've seen a drastic reduction in my blood pressure to 125/76. Do I have to worry about my kidneys getting damaged? Yes, emphatically, unquestionably, yes, you do. Please get a blood level and stop taking it for now until you get the blood level, and make sure you're safe, Joseph. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Bart, for your comments. Thanks to the rest of you for your interest. It's been a lot of fun today. Oh, somebody slipped one in right before we hung up. Johnny, which statin at what dose frequency is the least likely to cause muscle pain? I get extreme. It's rare for me to have patients that have significant muscle pain. I use rosuvastatin 5 milligrams a day or less, and I use pitavastatin. Those are both, and pitavastatin only comes in a 1 and 2 milligram dosage. So, thank you very much for your interest today. We will see you next week.